Hey guys, so let's continue with the tutorial, and I mentioned I want to do damage system next, but before we can create damage system, we need to create enemy health bars, because otherwise we won't be able to see how much damage we are causing, and we would have to do everything in a print string. So first thing we want to do is set up stats on the enemy. So let's open enemy blueprint, and in here we'll just add stats component. That is all done for us. And if you did the same setup as I did, you would have some basic stats here already that we can use, but we'll mostly be using only health on an enemy. So by default you can set it to something like maybe 200 and 200. Compile and save, and then on each enemy we can edit it as we want, but he will always have at least 200 here. So if you want to edit it, you just select the enemy, go to stats component, and then in the stats map array you edit the health stats. I don't think we will be using anything else. Armor, obviously, then we'll be using damage later and stuff. I'm not too keen on using stamina and mana because that will be all set up in an AI, so we don't really need to touch those. And after we have set the stats, what we want to do is just create new widget. So let's go to blueprints, widgets, right click, go to user interface and widget blueprint. Create user widget, and this one will be, we can probably call it enemy HUD underscore widget, just because it won't be health bar only, but we can later also display buffs and debuffs and anything else that we might need. So open it up. Here I want to add canvas panel, and then we're going to copy over the health bar from player. So I'm going to open player HUD, because we have health bars set up already, and I'm just going to copy everything in this border. I'm not going to get the white health bar. We might set it up later for enemies, but for now it will be just one health bar, so we can go into damage system and don't have to actually create all the functionality for this. So go back to enemy HUD, paste it here. Now we don't need this white health bar, as I said. I'm going to right click on a canvas panel, I'm going to replace it with child, because we don't need the second canvas panel. And then this border we're going to move to middle, so Control and Shift, hold it and click. And I'm going to make it smaller, so something like 20. We're going to make it shorter. I don't know what the good size will be, maybe 300. I'm just going to check because I do have this texture that I'm using, so I want to have a full bar when it's full. So I'll select the health bar, go to % and 1, and I think this is actually perfect if I have 300. So I do have 5 bars of health, and I'm also going to change the color to something more classic, like, yeah, maybe something towards more red. Compile and save. And now in this health bar, we will also need reference to actual enemy, but we're going to set it up instead of casting, because casting is quite hard if it's not player. So we'll have to do it from the enemy. And for that we can use blueprint interface. So let's go to interfaces, open combat BPI, and here we're going to add new function, and this will be set enemy reference. We will have an input which will be enemy BP object reference. This will be enemy ref. Compile and save. We can also add it to combat category, and then we go back to enemy HUD. I'll close the player HUD, we don't need it anymore. Actually, leave it open because there might be some functionality we can copy as well. And then in an enemy HUD, first thing you want to do is add the interface. So go to class settings, implemented interfaces, add, and this will be combat BPI. And now we do have functions, so we're going to do set enemy reference, double click, and we will have to pass it from the enemy itself. So in the enemy, we're first going to add widget. This widget will be enemy HUD, click on the HUD. First thing, change the space to screen. And widget class will be enemy HUD we created. And the screen will just make it so it actually always facing the player. And 500 and 500 is actually, I don't think it does anything because you're changing the size in the enemy HUD itself. So leave it as it is. And now we do have this enemy HUD. So on begin play, what we want to do is get enemy HUD, get widget. That will be our reference that we need to actually call something from the combat BPI. And now we can just pass on the message, which will be, what was it, set enemy reference. And we can do it on begin play. And enemy reference will be self. Death, I'm not going to connect. That just makes the enemy dead. And now we do have reference. So as soon as the game starts and enemy spawned, he will pass on the reference to its own enemy HUD. And in the HUD, what we can do on this event is from the reference, we need to probably let's promote it to variable. I'm just going to call it enemy ref. We will use it later. And after, let's create one more custom event. And this will be set. Player HUD will be, oh, enemy bar, set enemy bars. And we're going to call it here set enemy bars. So as soon as we pass on the reference, when the enemy is created, we will also set enemy bars, and we will set enemy bars from enemy reference. We need to get stats component. And from stats component, we need to get current stat and get max stat. And we're going to divide first one by the second one, which will give us the percentage. And then we can get the health bar and set percent function. Connect it from here. And then this goes to percentage. Can't actually select it. There we go. Move it down. Right, so that will set enemy health bar. Let's actually test it out because we should have a health bar here. We just need to move it. There we go. Health bar is created. What we want to do though is go on an enemy viewport, select that enemy HUD and move it just above the enemy. So like so. Alright, so now it's not overlapping the player, it's actually on top of the enemy, so it's fine. Except for this, but we kind of want that. We'll see if I later on put it behind the player. We'll see. For now, I'll leave it as it is. Next thing we want to do, so we do have enemy health bar. We now want to also update it when we cause damage. And we do have a function set up already in stats component. We just need to open it. So if I go to edit, stats component, and here we got event dispatcher, which is called every time we update any of the stats, because all of them goes through, I think it's set current stat, eventually, and here we're calling it. And in the enemy HUD, we just need to set it up so it will listen to this event. And since it's in a stats component, we just need to get the reference to stats component, but we got enemy reference, so we can get a stats component as well. So on begin play, on construct, delete pre-construct, delete tick, and on construct, we're going to get enemy reference, get stats component, and we're going to call it, so bind event on stats updated. So bind event is one in a default. Bind event on stats updated. So now it created a binding, so every time we update the stats, it will also go here. But only when we update the stats from the enemy stats component, because that is the reference. So player will be updating its own stats with the same thing that we have set up in player HUD. So here we also have a binding. and we're going to do it separately for enemy. So now from the event, we're going to create event, select this, create matching event. This one can be called update stats. And we do have quite complex function here. Not really that complex, but we're updating quite a lot of bars because we got that white health bar, stamina, mana and stuff. We only need health. So all we have to do is check if this stat equals health. And if it does, so do branch. Then we're going to get max stat. So copy this because we need stats component. And we also need get max stat actually. And we need to divide, so this one will go on the bottom, and we need to divide this value by max stat, which will give us percentage again. I'm just thinking if we're passing the actual value that we're changing it by, or if it's the value which is current stat. I think it's current stat. I forgot now. I apologize, I'm a bit confused now. Current health, what we're doing, value, new value, value divided by max stat. Okay, so this is the current stat that we're passing. So back to enemy, that's correct. We divide it by max stat, which will give us new percentage, and we'll set percent. And new percentage will be this value. Okay, so now we set up the basic system that every time we cause damage, it will call this event dispatcher, and in the event dispatcher, we will calculate again new percentage of the health bar and set it. Compile and save. And I think this is all we have to do here. So now if I just, for example, test it out by going to stats component and go to health, do 100. This bar is working fine. Also, just thinking how I would test it out with the buttons. I can't really because it's on the enemy. We'll just leave it for the damage system. So I'll leave it as it is, and in the next video now, since we have a health bar and everything else set up, we can just go into applying damage. So I'll see you then. Bye!